My blueberry cobbler with frozen blueberries recipe is easy and delicious. If you're looking for a quick and simple way to make an old-fashioned southern dessert, this is one you need to try. Let's go over the ingredients. This is a 9 by 13 cobbler, so for the batter style crust, you'll need 1 cup of self-rising flour, as I measure 150 grams, 1 cup of white sugar, as I measure 210 grams, 1 cup of milk, I'm using whole milk, 240 grams, and 1 stick of butter, 113 grams. I'm using unsalted, but you can use whatever you want. Also, optionally, I recommend adding 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract to the batter. For the fruit layer, you're going to need 30 ounces or about 6 cups of frozen whole blueberries. And as you can see, my fruit is still frozen, it is not thawed. To which I'm going to add half a cup of white sugar, as I measure 105 grams, and 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, 20 grams. Optionally, but highly recommended, also 2 tablespoons of light brown sugar, 30 grams, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and that's especially recommended if you're using unsalted butter. As you can see, I have everything that I need. My 9 by 13 baking dish is already buttered. The first step in this recipe is to melt the butter. I'm going to do it in the microwave, so I have my butter here. It's already cut in squares. I'm just going to put it into my measuring glass and then melt this in the microwave. You could just put the butter in the pan and then put the pan in a 350-degree oven, melt it that way. But if you do that, you run the risk of accidentally burning the butter and making it bitter. So I'm just going to do this in the microwave. I'm going to melt this and then I will bring you back. My butter is now melted. Like I said, it took 3 intervals of 20 seconds covered on high. So I'm just going to put that off to the side. And now I'm going to make the batter. Like I said, 1 cup of all-purpose flour, or excuse me, self-rising flour. If you have all-purpose, just add 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/4 teaspoon of salt to make the self-rising flour. 1 cup of sugar, 210 grams. Just gonna mix that together real fast. And then I'm going to add the milk. I am using 1 cup of whole milk, but if you have evaporated milk, I used that before, and honestly, I think you could probably use skim or whatever you have on hand. And then the optional 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Now I'm just going to stir this to combine. While I'm doing this, I'm preheating my oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit because this is a pretty easy recipe. It goes really fast. So we are going to be done with this before you even know it. This batter should have the consistency of pancake batter. So as you can see, it's pretty thin, but it does have lumps in it. That is totally fine. That is exactly what you want. So if your batter looks like this, fairly thin but with lumps, that's exactly what you want. Now I'm actually going to set the batter off to the side. There. I'm going to take my butter and I'm going to pour it into my pan. I'll just spread it out kind of evenly. And now I'm just going to try to distribute the butter as evenly as possible just by tilting the pan and making sure the bottom is coated. Before I started, I took a little bit of butter that I had in the refrigerator, just a little bit of extra, and I greased the sides and the bottom, so honestly I don't think this is going to really stick. But just try to distribute the butter as much as you can. Now that the melted butter is distributed fairly evenly, I'm going to pour in the batter. Now with this, I'm just gonna try to pour it in as evenly as possible. With these batter style cobblers, you do not mix. You just want to form layers. So the bottom layer is melted butter and the second layer is the batter. And since we're not stirring to combine, we have to try to pour it in as evenly as we can at the first go. So just do the best that you can. Now that the batter is in the pan, it's time to add the blueberries. So I'm just going to take a spoon here and I'm going to ladle them in very carefully to try to distribute them as evenly as possible. Because like I said, with this type of cobbler, we're not mixing, we're creating layers. So we want to try to distribute everything evenly. When I make cobblers like this with canned fruit, I usually use 3 cans and I'll make like 3 rows here. I think that might be a little bit harder to do with the frozen fruit. So just use your best judgment in terms of where to put everything. Some of the berries might be kind of still frozen together, so just break them apart. And actually, if you don't mind, your hands might be the best tool for this. So sometimes in the kitchen, your hands are the best tools. Actually, I might just take my own advice and do that. My hands are clean. If you see places where there are gaps, you might want to try to pick off some of the berries that are not touching the batter and just move them around a little bit. Shouldn't have to do a lot of cleanup. You don't want to touch berries that are already in contact with the batter. But like I said, if you see a place where the berries look a little thin, and you can do a little bit of limited cleanup, I think that's fine. Now that my blueberries are in a nice even layer, I'm going to take my sugar, 1/2 cup. I'm just going to sprinkle it over as evenly as I can. If you want to, you could, and I'm just going to use my hands. Like I said, sometimes your hands are your best tools. If you really wanted to, you could mix the fruit and the sugar and the cornstarch and even the brown sugar and lemon juice and salt in an extra bowl like that one if you wanted to, but I think the spirit of this type of cobbler is for it to be mostly done in one pan, so that's why I'm doing this. Just pour over the sugar like this. Try to get it as evenly as possible, and then also don't forget the cornstarch. So the cornstarch is what is going to thicken it. It's going to absorb some of the juices from the berries so that it's not soggy. The white sugar and cornstarch are now coating the blueberries. Now for the optional but recommended ingredients. First off, 1/8 teaspoon of salt. I know it sounds weird, but a little bit of salt in desserts helps to balance out all the flavors. Recommended. Brown sugar, 2 tablespoons. I know this dessert already has a lot of sugar, but 2 tablespoons of brown sugar is going to add a hint of molasses. That is going to be nice with the berries, I think. Going to make this a little more interesting. If you don't mind stuff on the sweet side, you could do 1/4 cup, or you could also replace some of the white sugar with brown sugar. But I think just a little bit of brown sugar is best because you'll get that brightness of the fruit. With the white sugar, it's not going to compete with the flavor of the blueberries. Just a little bit of brown sugar will be something interesting in the background. Now for the 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. This is just to emphasize the blueberry flavor. Lemon juice goes very well with fruit, especially berries. If you wanted to do some zest, you could as well, but too much zest, and I think this would turn into a lemon blueberry cobbler. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but I want this to be a blueberry dominant cobbler with just a little bit of lemon juice in the background to help. I just pulled my blueberry cobbler with frozen blueberries out of the oven. It was in at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, uncovered, for an hour and 5 minutes. So 65 minutes total. You can see it's bubbling. It looks and smells fantastic.
As you can see, my cobbler turned out great. The edges were perfectly golden brown and the blueberries in the middle cooked down into deep, dark purple goodness. Normally I like to eat cobblers like this while they're still warm, but I didn't have time with this one, so I had to wait until it had cooled down almost completely before I dug in. And when I cut the first slice and took the first bite, I knew that my blueberry cobbler with frozen blueberries recipe was a big success because it was absolutely delicious. First, let's talk about the flavor. Since I used 30 ounces of berries, there was definitely a strong blueberry flavor, and the bit of lemon juice helped to bring out the fruitiness even more. The bit of brown sugar added another dimension that was very nice in the background as well. So even though both the lemon juice and the light brown sugar technically aren't required ingredients, I highly recommend adding them. However, I do have to be honest about something. If you watch my channel, you know that I normally use frozen wild blueberries in cobblers and other desserts, but this time I used regular blueberries and I could definitely tell the difference. These blueberries were a lot less flavorful than the wild ones. I'm not saying they were bad, but if you have the option of buying frozen wild blueberries for this recipe, I would highly recommend it because the flavor is on another level. I like the flavor in the crust as well, the optional 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract really giving it an extra special something. I also like the level of sweetness of this dessert. Even though there was 1 cup of sugar in the topping and extra sugar that I added to the berries as you saw, I didn't think this dessert was too sweet. In fact, it was perfect. It was just right for either eating plain or with ice cream or whipped cream without becoming too sweet. Now let's talk about the texture. The middle was soft and pillowy with bits of berries, some of them staying whole and others falling apart as the cobbler baked and forming a juicy berry mass at the bottom. The crust was crispy around the edges as well as in some spots in the middle, but compared to the batter-style cobblers I made with canned fruit, this one definitely had a lot less crispy topping. That's not necessarily a bad thing, just something to point out. However, one aspect of the texture that I wasn't expecting but that I really liked was the fact that a lot of the sugar I sprinkled on top of the frozen blueberries stayed on top of the berries and didn't bake down into the cobbler. So it created a crunchy topping of semi-caramelized sugar on top, similar to what happens to the extra 2 tablespoons of sugar that I sprinkle on top of my pie crust cobblers. I know I kind of already touched on this, but now that you can see a slice of the cobbler up close, I wanted to say that I really liked how this looked. The berries were a deep, dark, rich purple. The crispy topping was perfectly golden brown, and the inside was creamy white, all of the colors contrasting perfectly. I'm sure you can tell that I really liked how this old-fashioned blueberry cobbler with frozen blueberries recipe turned out. It was easy to make and delicious to eat, and the fact that I did not have to thaw these berries, I literally just dropped them on top of the batter and baked it, made this super simple. But there are still a few things I wanted to mention. I think that 30 ounces of blueberries is the right amount for a 9x13 batter style cobbler. I know some grocery stores sell 16-ounce bags, so if you get 2 of those for 32 ounces total, that's perfectly fine. But I think 30 ounces is enough to cover the bottom of the 9x13 baking dish and give you a nice layer, as you can see now that I'm holding a little bit up to the camera, without overwhelming it and not having any crispy topping at all. But my only real critique of this recipe is that the bottom fruit layer wasn't quite as juicy or syrupy as I was expecting. As you can see, there was definitely a lot of fruit on the bottom, and it wasn't dry, but it just wasn't as juicy as I was expecting. Leaving out the cornstarch will probably make it juicier, but then you might not have quite as much crispy topping. So if you make this recipe at home and you leave out the cornstarch, let me know how it turns out. That being said, my southern style blueberry cobbler with frozen blueberries recipe was still a big success. It would be perfect for a holiday like the 4th of July, or even Thanksgiving, Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter, a picnic, a barbecue, or any day. If you make it, I know you'll like it. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.